Okay, let's keep talking about evolution. But before that, we are going to get some concepts. Um, so the first one is going to be genotype frequency. Remember that genotype is the alleles that are inside a specific genome. So in this case, we are talking about how often we see each allele combination. So it could be dominant homozygous or recessive homozygous or an heterozygous, and how common is that in the general population? Depending on the outcome, we can see if that specific allele or the specific trait um, represent what we know as the Mendel's law, or maybe there's a difference. Well, if we understand or if we catch, we discover that there is a difference between that and the idea, well, we can understand whatever process is going inside them. Then after that, well, the most common is the phenotype frequency, is how often we see one on another specific trait. Um, Again, this is related with the genotype frequency. The issue is that, well, it's a little hard to actually analyze the whole genome of all the members of one species. So most of the time, what we got is the phenotype frequency. And less common is the allele frequency. It's like another step up depending on the genotype frequency. And in this case, is how often we see each allele. Um, in that case, well, we only have two alleles, depending on which one we are talking about, the recessive and the dominant one. Again, this is just for clarification. Mutation is what we know as unpredictable change in the structure of or amount of DNA of an organism in a general way. Remember that we got transcription and well, we got several other processes in the DNA. Um, Again, in meiosis, we got what we know as more or less translocation. So the genes can move locations because of that, but that's something that normally happens. Here, when we're talking about mutation, is something, yeah, random that is different from that process. Um, yeah, most of the time, this mutation can happen in somatic cells. That means any cells that don't work for reproduction. And well, if that's the case, well, that mutation will stay in that cell and nothing will happen at the end. It's like if you're talking, for example, about your skin cells, and well, there are obviously some mutation because of the UV light. Well, yeah, that could be bad, but it's not going to pass on to the next generation. But sometimes this mutation can happen in gametes. That means the cells that you can use for reproduce, the ovule and the sperm, and well, that way those mutations can be inherited. The gene flow in this case means when we got two different populations of the same species, but for some reason they are apart. So the genes could be different, but once they are connected because some reason, well, the genes start like moving from one another. You can say so, for example, with well, we got a gene pool here in the Americas before all the Europeans came over to, well, you know, conquer and stuff like that. And because of that, well, the gene pool changed. The allele frequency of some, well, it changed, and also the phenotype frequency and so on. So that's the gene flow. When some genes, some alleles that were present in a population move to another one of the same species. Genetic drift. This is something that we already covered. Let me show you here. We got genetic drift here. We already mentioned most of this. But in this, just the general idea means that sometimes, because of random stuff, we can have some genes that will appear more frequently compared with another ones just because random stuff. Doesn't mean that one of them is going to be giving advantage over the other ones. It's just random stuff. And that could happen with any population. Okay, here is just one slide about natural selection. Hopefully you enjoyed. It's just that, well, in this case, if the birds are eating only the green ones, well, the ones that will survive and will have offspring are the ones that are not green. And that's why it's important the variability in one species, because that way they can ensure the survival. I mean, if all of them were green, well, they will be dead by now. or the population will be diminished very badly. But in this case, since they got several colors, well, they can like switch sides so they don't die. Types of natural selection, and this is something new. It's something that you will have to define later for homework. We have disrupted selection. That means the original one is the red one, and after several generation, we are going to have this the one at the middle die because some reason. Let's just say that we're talking about size, and this one were the ones in the middle. So the big one will live because well they are big enough to actually reproduce. But the small one could also be able to reproduce because they are too small for the big to actually find them. So they can, if we are talking about fishes, they can sneak out in between rocks or something like that, so they can escape the very efficiently other fishes that can eat them, so they can reproduce. Only the ones in the middle they cannot like fight and or hide. Well, those are the ones who die. Directional selection. In this case, well, we have something like this, the red one. Only the small are surviving, but after some reason, some stuff is going to be the other way. Also very common. And stabilization selection. That means the one at the corner, the top ones and the one at the bottom, well, they are going to disappear for some reason. Only the one in the middle will appear. Again, this is something we use to analyze population, how they change. And well, if we do that, well, if we gather all the data, well, we can have a better idea of what is happening with the population if we are doing something to damage them. Non-random mating. This is a very specific idea. In this case, means that they have a choose. They got to choose which is the mate, and well, with whom they will have offspring. So this is something very common. For example, with humans, we don't have random mating. Yeah, maybe sometimes it looks like random, but we can choose like for real. It's not like we are there and then we have to mate. We can choose, hopefully. The result of non-random mating is that some individuals have more opportunity to mate than others. Because of that, they will produce more offspring, more copies of their genes than the other ones. So that's very common with the cases of species where there is a dominant male, and that's the only one who reproduce. Um, that's well, that's going to continue those genes instead of the other ones that well they weren't big enough. So for example, we got two different types for non-random mating. That's assortative mating. That means that you only mate with you only have offspring with the ones that are similar to you. That's the first one, assortative mating. And the other one, this assortative mating, uh, you have preference for the ones that are different from you. They have different phenotypes. Uh, Remember, most of the time we talk about phenotypes because that's the stuff we can see. But well, it's the same idea talking about genotype. Um, just for you to know what happens when you are inbreeding. That means that, for example, here the two brothers are having babies. Well, that will increase the possibilities of having a kid with the recessive trait. Most of the time, the diseases, the genetic disorders are recessive. That means that you need two copies of the same genes in order to, well, that won't be common. So if you got a lot of inbreeding, well, you will have more recessive traits in your population. The gene pool, this is a little concept that I used before. When we were talking about the phenotype frequency, genotype frequency, and allele frequency. The gene pool, it means that all the information, all the genetic information that you got in a population, that you can actually get your hands on. And well, it's obviously one particular species. Um, Maybe sometimes you can use several of them. If we're talking about mammals or birds in general, you can say some depending on the gene you're studying. But the gene pool is that, and how different is one from another. So how do we reach equilibrium? The genes, the allele frequency and the phenotype frequency, they will reach some equilibrium. The phenotype, the dominant trait is going to be more common than the recessive trait. That's math, people. And well, at the end, you will have 25% dominant homozygous, 50% heterozygous, and 25% dominant recessive homozygous. And that's what we know as the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. How do we reach that? Well, in order to have that, you will have to, well, no selection, like anyone can mate. That's for sure. Not individual is going to be marginalized uh, from the population, the general population. There is no new mutation. All of them more or less contain the same gene pool. So there's no new mutation in there. No migration. Migration, remember, is related with the I just forget. Let me look for that. With reproductive isolation. I don't know where I didn't remember that. Okay, so migration is related with that reproductive isolation. That means that they won't be able to mate, and if something happened, maybe this river is too big for them to come back. So we got a whole part of the species living in a different region. So they will spread apart. Like, the genes will, well, they won't get mixed with each other. So we will want to have different gene pools. So for Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, there must be non-migration. There must be a large population, so we have random mating for sure. And well, anyone can uh, get the partner they like. So that's what we know as the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. We're gonna have some exercise with this week, and that's gonna be the last slide for today. Thank you all for watching. If you got any questions, don't be afraid to ask.